Hello, I'm Anavultus, and here's Berckenhoff with me, and today, welcome back to Getting the Answers, and today we're going to be talking about some gun reform, some gun laws, some gun control.
Yes, this is a very hot topic among many people, especially here in the South. And I live in Texas, and you live in Florida, so they're both pretty gun-heavy states. So I thought it would be kind of interesting to talk about it from our perspectives. Although I think I have a very different perspective from the average Texan. Not that I don't like guns. I don't want to make that clear, but I don't really we'll get into the details, but I think I have a little bit of a different perspective than like the average gun owner of Texas.
Okay. So, anyway, there's a number of different gun laws that are constantly being passed around, and people are always talking about which ones they want, which ones they don't want. But I think that the one that is prominent today, the one that we're probably going to be talking about the most, is House of Representatives or House Resolution 127, the Sabika Sheikh Firearm Licensing and Registration Act. Is that the one you're familiar with?
Yes, that's the one I was the most familiar with. Yes.
Yes. So I'm going to be showing the text on screen a bit. Let me just shift us sort of into a smaller position on the screen so that we can have everything on screen at once.
Yes, and people could read it. There's not much point showing text if you can't necessarily read it.
That's right. So for that reason, there we go. So this is in the 117th Congress, and it was introduced on the 4th of January. And the purpose for it is to provide for the licensing of firearm and ammunition possession and the registration of firearms, and to prohibit the possession of certain ammunition. It was introduced by Miss Jackson Lee, who I believe is a Democratic representative, and was referred to the Committee on the Judiciary. From the information I have, it's still in committee, but according to what you told me, it may be put out to a vote soon.
That's what I was hearing about it. Now I don't know how soon they were talking about soon is from the articles and like videos I was looking into it for, because the whole process is a pretty long process itself. So I don't know what everybody was meaning by soon. Like nobody had necessarily a date on it, but it looked like it was going to be like the first one that people are going to have an actual vote on out of like the three that are kind of getting talked about. And Sheila Jackson Lee is a Democratic representative from Houston.
Yeah, so this is coming out of Texas in a way.
Yes, in a way. The city way. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, so the it's got its title. I don't know who Sabika Sheikh is. I believe it probably actually I can look it up real quick. It's not really relevant to the law itself, but
No.
because it doesn't really refer to much. But anyway,
They're just the writers of the bill.
yeah,
So
the
yeah.
story of Sabika Sheikh is that the family of a high school exchange student from Pakistan who was killed in a Texas school shooting have started a foundation in her name to honor her memories. Sabika Sheikh was killed in a May 2018 shooting at Santa Fe High School near Houston that left 10 people dead and at least 13 others wounded. As I expected, it was the name of a victim of a crime, and that's a common naming convention that some of these laws have. It's named after a victim of a crime.
Right.
Yeah, so the implication here is that if laws such as this were to be passed, that crimes such as what occurred to Sabika, Sheikh, among others, would be less likely to occur. I believe that is the hope and implication in making laws such as this.
Yes, I would like to think that that is the motivation for naming it in that way, or at least trying to control that event from happening. Because you said it was a mass shooting, right?
Yes, it was a mass
Yeah.
shooting.
So that's a type of bill to try to prevent mass shootings from happening. You would think that that would be the goal of the bill for its naming purpose.
Yes, and this is an emendation of Chapter 44 of Title 18 in the United States Code. So Title 18, let me get here, is the part of the U.S. Code. I don't know if it's not centered for this webpage, but it's the part of the U.S. Code that deals with crimes and criminal procedures. Part 1 of this deals with the various crimes that are that exist on the federal level in the United States, and Chapter 44 deals with crimes related to firearms. So as we can see, there's a number of different sections going up to 931, and this new law, if it passes, would become Section 932 in Title 18 U.S. Code Chapter 44.
Right.
Yeah. And as such, some parts of this bill refer to parts of Chapter 44 in the U.S. Code. So I thought that's important to mention in case people get confused about where something is referring to, if it's not referring to itself internally in the bill.
Right. Good background knowledge to have, if anything.
Yeah, I think the U.S. Code should be read in schools, but that's just my opinion. But anyway, the beginning says, in general, the Attorney General, through the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, shall establish a system for licensing the possession of firearms or ammunition in the United States, and for the registration with the Bureau of each firearm present in the United States.
Yes. That's the part where a lot of people are getting a little bit scared for gun owners, especially here in Texas and probably everywhere else. I guess I'll just tell this story real quick. It doesn't particularly relate to, well, it does relate to this, but I just found it a little bit funny. I was just searching up the bill on YouTube just to see what people's comments were on it in particular after reading some articles. And there's this one guy, it was like, I have a ton of guns. So the idea that I would have to register all of my guns is a scary thought to me. And then he was also talking about how part of the bill made it to where you only can buy like a gun per a day or a gun per a week, that type of legislation. And he was like, he thought that that was really bad as well. But the thing I found a little bit funny is I'm like, the idea of buying a gun each day or a gun each week seemed a little bit funny to me because I don't particularly would do that. But it was just interesting to get his feedback because he's the type of people that you think about when these bills get talked about or potentially get passed, because he's the one that like is 100% pro guns. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think generally a concept of limiting how many guns you can buy in a period would primarily impact maybe security companies, private security companies, that is, and collectors, perhaps.
Yeah.
Although, perhaps gun dealers that aren't affiliated with manufacturers. I'm not entirely sure about that. I'd have to read more. But anyway, the type of information on of the registration that is required is the make, model, and serial number of the firearm, the identity of the owner of the firearm, the date the firearm was acquired by the owner, and where the firearm is or will be stored. Now, on the date part, I think that might be a bit complicated because there's some people that perhaps didn't keep track of when they got a gun. And of course, where the firearm is or will be stored is, I guess, useful information for the ATF if they want to raid someone. To know where the guns are.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And another requirement is a notice specifying the identity of any person to whom and any period of time during which the firearm will be loaned to the person. So if you let somebody else borrow the gun for whatever reason, maybe hunting, for example, then there needs to be a special notice sent to the ATF.
Right. So, kind of how the easiest way to understand this is basically if this were to get passed in legislation, is the ATF and government, I guess you could say, if you want to put a broad branch on it, would know where your gun is located and know who has your gun and every time. So they, in other words, like they know exactly what type your gun is and where you have it consistently, and that seems a little scary to some people.
Yes, and of course there is a deadline for supplying this information because they don't want people to drag their feet on this. In the case of firearm acquired before the effective date of this section within 3 months after the effective date of this section, or in the case of a firearm acquired on or after the effective date, on the date the owner acquires the firearm. So that is when the deadline is. So if you have a gun already before this, you don't have a grandfather exception for registering it. You have to register it within 3 months. And if you get a new gun at any point after that, it would probably be registered as part of the transaction of getting the gun.
Right. Yeah. I would think that that's what it would have to work for that particular part. I don't really see how it could be another way of doing that.
Yeah, and they're also establishing a database, which the Attorney General shall maintain, which describes all the firearms registered and presumably the names of everybody that own the guns and the address and location of the guns. And the Attorney General shall make the contents of the database accessible to all members of the public, all federal, state, and local law enforcement authorities, all branches of the United States Armed Forces, and all state and local governments as defined by the Bureau. So this means that you can look up somebody on the database and you can know whether or not they own a gun. Now, I think this is useful information for perhaps burglars.
Right, for crime or people who, yeah. The only bad thing about when you talk about crimes is how they get the gun in the first place. Because most of the time it's either by a friend, and they're not going to say that they gave the gun to that person. But I guess you could track it through police techniques to figure out what type of gun and everything like that. But
Yeah.
second thing I wanted to mention there is most of the time these criminals will not shave off. I guess shave works, but scratch off the serial number of the gun in particular. So it'd be hard to identify it through that.
Yeah, also, if you know somebody is going on vacation or somebody's leaving the house, then you can look up the location of that person's gun, and you can essentially steal somebody else's gun and commit a crime with it. And since you know where all the guns in the country are, at least all the registered ones, it's very easy to find a quick way to gain access to weapons illegally. Now, of course, it depends on the home security that somebody has. But if you know somebody's out of the house and you know that they have a gun and you know exactly where the gun is in their home, then it's pretty easy. Or if you know that somebody has a gun and you're burglarizing that person, you know where to avoid that person going while you're burglarizing them as well.
Right. Well, most of the time, the burglars won't do it when someone is physically home. That's why most burglars, despite what people think, occur during the day, because people tend to not pay much attention during the day.
Yeah, but a lot of people aren't home during the day.
Are not home, exactly. But I just wanted to say one other thing, was that the people are very stupid in some ways, because they'll be posting on Facebook or whatever saying like, hey, we're going on vacation. So it's like all the criminal has to do is figure out who those people are, knows exactly when they are going on vacation, and then obviously if this were to get passed, go up to the database. So it's like, you're making it very easy in that way.
Yeah, and it could actually be very lucrative on the black market to target guns for illegal trade, in the sense that if people want to use an unregistered firearm in a crime, then what they can do is they can steal a registered firearm and sell it at a very high price. And on the black market, that would be very desirable, I would presume, as there already exists a black market for guns. But I think that this would certainly offer a business opportunity. And I'm not encouraging this, by the way. I'm not encouraging people operating in black markets. But what I am saying is that for people who do operate in black markets, this certainly is a business opportunity.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I didn't really see that perspective till you mentioned it, but it makes total sense how that could potentially be used. Because if it's a public database and anybody's able to go to it, it's like it could lead to that. The only thing is if they were to put restrictions on who can visit, but then it's no longer like a public database. So it was kind of interesting on that, because like you can search people to find their number or where they live pretty easily now. So if it's like the same sort of thing for guns, I mean, it makes total sense how it could potentially lead to something like that.
Yeah. So here's the requirements for the license. So the requirements for the license, except as otherwise provided in this subsection, the Attorney General shall issue to an individual a license to possess a firearm and ammunition if the individual has attained 21 years of age, and after applying for the license undergoes a criminal background check conducted by the National Instant Criminal Background Check System established under Section 103 of the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, and the check does not indicate the possession of a firearm by the individual would violate subsection G or N of Section 992, which is in the 922 unlawful acts under U.S. Code Chapter 44 Firearms, or state law. And 2, undergoes a psychological evaluation conducted in accordance with paragraph 2, and the evaluation does not indicate that the individual is psychologically unsuited to possess a firearm. And 3, successfully completes a training course certified by the Attorney General in the use, safety, and storage of firearms that includes at least 24 hours of training and demonstrates that an issuance of the license, the individual will have in effect an insurance policy issued under subsection D, which means that essentially you have to go through a background check, a psychological evaluation. You need to complete a 24-hour-long training course, which obviously is not 24 hours back to back. It's probably you take a course that takes a few weeks. And then you also have to have an insurance.
Mm-hmm. Just one, yeah. So background checks have been a concept in with guns for a long time now, especially since I've started paying attention to gun laws and everything like that. In general, if you believe the statistics, they're widely accepted between really both parties for the most part. So I see background checks being something that somehow is going to get passed to make it a little bit potentially stricter or require more standards across all states and not each state kind of being able to do its own sort of thing. But I don't know if that's even going to be the case, but I just wanted to mention that first. The second part about the training course and just making it a little bit harder to obtain the gun, this is where you kind of get into a debate on how guns work, more like through gun purchasing. Because in a lot of states, you simply can just have a background check, have the money or whatever, and get the gun that day, and no training is necessarily required. So the debate really is if is that training necessary to at least help gun owners, or is it just an inconvenience? Like, is it really going to do anything?
Well, that is the debate. Now, my opinion is that in some parts of the country, a mandatory training probably isn't necessary because people have a long relationship with gun culture. Now, in some other parts of the country, it might be necessary. My opinion here is that the regulation on these types of issues should be a lot more local, and that it should be decided within the community what people believe is necessary for a safe use of guns. So in that sense, some areas might have very little regulations and some areas might be heavily regulated. It all depends on the needs of the community. That's my opinion on that.
Well, the only thing to play devil's advocate to that point, and I'm all for individual communities because I think that's a much better style of governing, but just to play devil's advocate, is would you have to live in that particular community to purchase the gun there, or would you be allowed to go out of your community? Because if that's the case, then someone could just go to a community that is a lot less strict and purchase their gun there.
Yes, but the community that they live in might have a problem with that, so it would still be a crime in that sense.
Right. Okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, there's ways to deal with this that avoids creating loopholes. But I just wanted to mention that Section 922, which is mentioned here, which if somebody violates Section 922, that they are not allowed to get the license. That's the illegal trading of guns.
Okay.
Yeah, the essentially participating in black market gun trade is a Section 922 violation. Now it's more complex than that since it's a very long section, but that's sort of the gist of it.
That's the spark notes.
Yeah. Now, there's a special provision here for antique firearm display license. The Attorney General shall issue to an individual a license to display an antique firearm in a residence if the individual is the holder of a license under subparagraph A. 2. Supplies proof that the individual owns an antique firearm. 3. Describes the manner in which the firearm will be displayed in accordance with regulations prescribed by the Attorney General and certifies that the firearm will be so displayed. And 4. Demonstrates that the individual has provided for storage of the firearm in a safe or facility approved by the Attorney General for the storage of firearms. So this means essentially that you can't really display a firearm unless you get an additional license. The implication is that a regular license means that you have to put your firearm in a safe or Attorney General approved facility in order to conform with the requirement for secure storage of the firearm.
Right. I would assume that there would be, well, it's a separate license, so there would have to be regulations in particular for what would happen there. So,
yeah,
I don't know exactly what those regulations would be, but let's just say it has to be like a special display case or something.
Well, according to this, it's entirely up to the Attorney General. The Attorney General can decide exactly which firearms are allowed to be displayed and how they are allowed to be displayed, and what is constituted as a secure enough storage for a firearm is entirely up to the Attorney General, according to this.
That's a lot of power.
It is. It is.
Yeah, it's like that's. And then what's to say why, you know, gun A is different than gun B, but they allow gun A to be displayed and not gun B?
Because here, it doesn't say what an antique firearm is. Now, obviously, a relatively contemporary firearm probably wouldn't qualify as an antique, and therefore, is there a loophole that you can display contemporary firearms, but you need a special license to display antique ones? I think that would be against the spirit of the law. So in my opinion, I think the implication would be that all firearms would require a special license to be displayed.
I would assume so. I just think they highlight antique because people might be thinking, well, I don't really use this gun. It's just more display.
Yeah,
like,
the old blunderbuss on the wall.
Right, right. Yeah, so I would think to display any gun, you would need some sort of license, but yeah, that wouldn't make much sense if they said, "Oh, no, you only need this license because it's antique." Like that is like, okay, like that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. So there's another part: military-style weapons license. The Attorney General shall issue to an individual a license to own and possess a military-style weapon if the individual is the holder of a license issued under subparagraph A. So you already need a regular license, so you're double licensing here. And 2, after applying for a license under this subparagraph, successfully completes a training course, an additional training course that is, certified by the Attorney General in the use, safety, and storage of the weapon that includes at least 24 hours of training and live fire training. So you need 48 hours of training.
So would these training courses be done by the state, or who's doing the training courses?
It's a course certified by the Attorney General. So it could be private contractors, it could be the state, it could be a federal agency. It's not clarified here.
Right. Yeah, that was kind of what I was hinting at there. So yeah, you would need. So okay, so you would need your 24-hour training course to get your license for the gun, and if you had a military style weapon, then you would need another training course on top of that.
Yeah, and get approved for the license as well. So you now need 2 licenses. And again, it's not defined here what a military style weapon is, because it's not, they're not saying weapons that are actively used by the military on the battlefield. They're saying military style weapon. So what that could mean simply is a military style grip on a rifle or something, which is largely aesthetic feature. And in order to use a weapon that has that aesthetic feature, something that is simply involved in the appearance of a weapon, you need an additional 24 hours of training.
Yeah, yeah, like that is funny. Yeah, because I mean, yeah, that's funny. I'm just also thinking because my brain goes to this is just the cost of what all that would be, because you would have to. I'm assuming you would have to pay for both licenses. You would have to pay for both the training.
Yes, there's a have to pay fee for the gun for the license that is discussed later.
Yes, right. Yeah, so we'll get into that, but I'm just thinking it's like. So especially if it's just an aesthetic feature, like you were mentioning, you would have to do a license and all. Just the cost is like crazy.
Yeah, because it's an additional time cost, and time is money. So, so there you go. Moving further, they continue to discuss the psychological evaluation, and this issue. I think it's discussed further down. A psychological evaluation is conducted in accordance with this paragraph if A, the evaluation is conducted in compliance with such standards as shall be established by the Attorney General, which means he can do whatever he wants. The evaluation is conducted by a licensed psychologist approved by the Attorney General, who can approve whoever he wants, and C, deemed necessary by the licensed psychologist involved, who of course is chosen by the Attorney General. The evaluation included a psychological evaluation of other members of the household in which the individual resides. And D, as part of a psychological evaluation, the licensed psychologist interviewed any spouse of the individual, any former spouse of the individual, and at least 2 other persons who are a member of the family of and or an associate of the individual to further determine the state of the mental, emotional, and relational stability of the individual in relation to firearms.
Mm-hmm.
So you better have a good relationship with your ex, or
yeah, then you have problems.
Yeah, and of course, because the Attorney General gets to decide all these things, the Attorney General, of course, is somewhat a partisan politician, in the sense that the Attorney General is appointed by the president, who wins usually due to the support of a particular party, which means that all these issues and how they are resolved can vastly be changed by which party is in power.
Right. They must really like the Attorney General to try to get this passed right now. That's just a lot of power. You would think you would want to at least spread it out a little bit, just to make sure like the person isn't like completely opposite to what you want to be for gun legislation or anything like that.
Yeah. What if the Attorney General, in his immense wisdom decides to simply not not approve any licensed psychologist. In that case,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
no licenses for any guns. Wouldn't that be funny? Although I think they are going to license people, but it is something that can conceivably happen under this law.
Right. Well, that's kind of what I was saying. It's like you're either going to have somebody who's going to abuse it like fully, or it's going to be like, no, I don't really agree with any of this and not do something, you know? Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense to give that much power just one person.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting they're using psychologist rather than neuroscientist or psychiatrist or other things, because as we discussed previously, psychology is not an exact science.
It's based in theories, like we were explaining with the Maslow episode.
Yeah, there are some parts of psychology that are very solid and are based on behavioral studies and have confirmation in neuroscience, and then there's other parts of psychology where it's just somebody's opinion. And yes, the parts that are people's opinion are very prominent in psychology still today. And because of that, I think that getting a psychologist to do this might not be 100% the best way. Perhaps someone who's more affiliated with law enforcement, perhaps it might be better to this. Not that I'm saying that I like this system. I'm just saying that you can cherry pick your psychologists, and that can become a problem as well.
For sure, yeah. I mean, you would think if they wanted to kind of test a person's mental ability and make sure like they were sane person, you wouldn't want to go to somebody like a psychologist really, but maybe like the family doctor or something like that where they know them a lot better. But then you could get into some problems with using that as a professional opinion as well. I don't think any one system's perfect for a background check in that way.
Yeah, but it's interesting. Any former spouse. So there's no time limit on this. This could be 20, 30, 40 years ago. And if they don't like you, they can say anything they want about you.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll be part of the official evaluation.
Yeah, that would be a good way to get back at your boyfriend or get back at your ex-spouse or whatever. Just to be like, yeah, no, he was a crazy guy. Yeah, he's just terrible or whatever.
Yeah, always threatening people with guns. He had a handgun and he'd pistol wave it around everywhere.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So now for the reasons why the license can be denied. So the Attorney General shall deny such a license to an individual if the individual is prohibited by federal law from possessing a firearm. Okay, that's expected, of course. 2, if the individual has been hospitalized with a mental illness disturbance or diagnosis, including depression, homicidal ideation, suicidal ideation, attempted suicide, or addiction to a controlled substance within the meaning of the Controlled Substances Act, or alcohol or brain disease, including dementia or Alzheimer's, or on account of conduct that endangers self or others. Now, this part is somewhat controversial because, again, this refers to hospitalization. Okay. So this is, of course, not referring to people that are depressed and are never hospitalized or diagnosed with anything. However, let's say you have been hospitalized at some point and then you recover later on. Are you still not allowed to have a gun if at any point in your life you have had clinical depression and were hospitalized?
The depression one is the one that doesn't make the most sense out of all of those what you read, because people can overcome depression. Like it's a pretty common story of people who, you know, have gotten out of the rut or whatever you want to use or your phrase for it. But it's very possible to become not oppressed or not. Yeah. So I mean, if like at one point you were bad enough to where you had to like get pills for it or something like that, and now you can no longer ever have a gun, that seems a little bit extreme.
Yeah, because it doesn't put a time limit on this. It doesn't say within the past month, within the past year, within the past century. This could be at any point in your life. You've been hospitalized with any mental illness, any disturbance, any diagnosis, any brain disease at all, of any kind, even if it didn't affect you very much. So this is a bit of a slippery slope. Well, this whole law is a bit of a slippery slope in a number of different areas. But this part in particular, I heard that there was a similar provision in New York State or New York City, I don't remember which one, where people included a clause relating to depression that similarly didn't have limitations on how it could be interpreted, and that was controversial. And I expect this to be controversial as well.
Yeah, for sure. I could see an idea of putting a time, like you were mentioning, maybe it wouldn't be still as controversial, but even having a time, I think people would find it still as being a kind of a controversial clause to have in your bill.
Yeah, it is, because, again, the Second Amendment talks about a right that should not be infringed. And that's the plain language there. And in that sense, I would say that although a lot of places have limitations on, for example, people that were convicted for a felony and then came out of prison and have served their time might still be prohibited from possessing firearms, I think that under the Constitution, if you've served your time, in my opinion, you should be allowed to once again exercise your rights fully. That's my opinion, though.
Right. Yeah. The only other thing to play devil's advocate on this particular part, and what we kind of both agree with, would be basically the insanity clause is kind of where I could see some people saying, like, well, if this person has had a mental breakdown or dementia or something like super severe, they shouldn't be allowed to have a gun because you can't trust their mental ability to use the gun. So I could see some people agreeing to that stance, but even then, I don't really necessarily fully agree on that either, personally. But
yeah, but this goes all the way up to the federal level. The Attorney General is responsible for this. It's not that you look at this person from a community's perspective on a case-by-case basis and you examine this person. It's the Attorney General who is responsible for the hundreds of millions of Americans, has the sole responsibility to deny the license.
Right.
And I think that's where the problem comes in. It's that situations can be relatively nuanced, but if you take a very centralized perspective, if you take a perspective that looks at everything from only the top level, that these problems can only be resolved on the top level, you end up essentially flattening the field when, in fact, the terrain works best, perhaps not as flattened. That's my opinion, though.
Yeah, you create many blind spots by doing a broad stroke.
Yeah, broad strokes. I think that's a good metaphor there. Yeah. So, other reasons that the Attorney General can deny a license, because he's required to deny on the previous reasons that we mentioned, but there are other reasons why he can deny. The Attorney General may deny such a license to an individual if the psychological evaluation referred to in paragraph 2 indicates that the individual has a chronic mental illness or disturbance or brain disease referred to in subparagraph A21, which is the previous part that we just talked about.
Yeah.
2 is addicted to a controlled substance within the meaning of the Controlled Substances Act or alcohol. Or 3 has attempted to commit suicide, presumably at any point in his life. At any point, even if it's 50 years ago. Or prior psychological treatment or evaluation of the individual indicated that the individual engaged in conduct that posed a danger to self or others. Of any kind, presumably.
Yeah, that's very broad as well.
Yeah. So if you get a hormonal, emotional teenager that makes bad choices, and you age him up some 20 years, and he's got his act together, and he's building a family, but he made one bad choice in the past, even if it wasn't a criminal act, even if he never was charged or convicted with anything, he could still be denied the right to carry a weapon.
Because of the no time limit, as we were suggesting, and this is across several points of the bill now. So yeah, like that. I guess we could. That was a common thing I was hearing amongst the videos, mostly of people who had more of their personal opinions and not just talking about the bill. But they were like, when someone wants to buy a gun, sometimes it's need to have the gun now type of thing, because they're afraid of their life because maybe a crazy ex or whatever it might be. There's several cases where people will buy a gun for that. And you may have even saw that with the amount of gun purchases that happened before Biden became president, because people were afraid that the country was going to go bad or whatever their reasons were. So the whole idea about that is also another thing I've been seeing, but that's more about the licensing more than this particular part of the bill. But it's kind of the same sort of concept, where there's not really a time cause on that particular parts.
Indeed. And that's once again the problem, that there is a slippery slope where you could construe a wide range of actions as prohibitive to the licensing for the ownership of firearms. But there's a number of reasons why the license can be suspended moving further on. A license issued under this subsection to an individual who is under indictment for a crime punishable by imprisonment for a term exceeding 1 year is hereby suspended. The other part, the Attorney General may suspend a license issued under the subsection to an individual who has violated Section 922 DD in the most recent 12-month period. So once again, relating to the illegal trade of firearms.
Right.
Yeah, and the license can be revoked. License issued under the subsection to an individual who is or becomes prohibited by federal or state law from possessing a firearm is hereby revoked. Such an individual shall immediately return the license and surrender all firearms and ammunition owned or possessed by the individual to the Attorney General. Which means that the Attorney General's office receives the forfeiture of all firearms and ammunition if the license is revoked for any reason. So let's say you commit a non-violent crime that gets you imprisoned for, let's say, 13 months, and your license is suspended, and then you're not allowed to have a firearms. But if for any reason you are not allowed to have a firearm, it goes directly to the federal government, not the state. Because, again, the prohibition for the ownership of a firearm can be done under state law. But even if, under state law, you're no longer allowed to possess a firearm, the firearms are forfeited to the Attorney General.
So he's going to have a lot of guns then.
Yeah.
He won't have to purchase the government money for his security detail. He'll just get those from other people.
Yeah. A license issued to an individual under this subsection shall expire, A, in the case of a license that has been in effect for less than 5 years, 1 year after issuance or renewal, as the case may be, or B, in the case of a license that has been in effect for at least 5 years, 3 years after the most recent date of the date the license is renewed. So this is interesting to me because okay, if you renew your license and it has been in effect less than 5 years, then 1 year after the issuance or renewal of the license expires. That is the old license.
Right.
Can't they just say that you renew under the same license?
I mean, you would think, but maybe they want you to have the different license for the training course or something like that.
It's just weird to me.
Yeah, no, I get it.
It sounds like something that could have been streamlined, but isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it does talk about renewal here. The Attorney General shall renew a license issued to an individual under the subsection if the individual A, requests the renewal by the end of a 60-day period that begins with the date the license expires. B, in the 3-year period ending with the date the renewal is requested, if the requirements have been met, as were discussed earlier, and this person has successfully completed a training course, once again, certified by the Attorney General in the use, safety, and storage of firearms that includes at least 8 hours of training.
Is this 8 hours of additional training, or...?
This is additional training.
Oh, okay.
So you took the 24 hours of training, and perhaps the 24 hours more for the military-style weapon, and now when it expires, you need 8 hours more of training when you're renewing the license.
That's lovely. That seems like overkill. I don't know what else to say on that one.
In the case of a license issued under paragraph 1C, in the 2-year period ending with the date the renewal is requested, has successfully completed a training course certified by the Attorney General that includes at least 8 hours of training in the use of a weapon subject to the license. So it's training specific for the license. And for this to exist, that's going to be money if you're training for a specific weapon.
Yep.
Because all these training courses, they cost money. But speaking about money, now we get to the part with firearm insurance. The Attorney General shall issue to any person who has applied for a license pursuant to subsection C and has paid to the Attorney General the fee specified in paragraph 2 of this subsection a policy that insures the person against liability for losses and damages resulting from the use of any firearm by the person during the 1-year period that begins with the date the policy is issued. So within the fee that you have to pay, the fee specified in this paragraph is $800. So you have to pay $800 to the Attorney General in order to exercise your Second Amendment rights.
That's a lot of money. Yeah, that's $800 for the insurance you were saying?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So the government is making you buy an insurance policy for $800 in order to exercise your Second Amendment rights.
Yeah, which seems in direct violation to the Second Amendment.
Okay, but now at least we know what a military-style weapon is, because here's the definition. Okay. Section 921A of such title is amended by inserting, after paragraph 29, the following 30. The term military-style weapon means any of the firearms or copies or duplicates of the firearms in any caliber known as Norinco, Mitchell, and Poly Technologies Automat Kalashnikov, all models, of course, Action Arms Israeli Military Industries, Uzi and Galil, Beretta AR-70, SC-70, Colt AR-15, Fabrique Nationale, FN, FAL, FN, LER, and FNC, SWD, M10, M11, M11/9, and M12, Steyeraug, Intratec Tech 9, Tech DC-9, and Tech 22, and revolving cylinder shotguns such as or similar to the Street Sweeper and Striker 12. But that's only part A of the definition. Part B is...
there's more.
Yeah. A semi-automatic rifle that has an ability to accept a detachable magazine and has at least 2 of, a folding or telescoping stock, a pistol grip that protrudes conspicuously beneath the action of a weapon, a bayonet mount, a flash suppressor or threaded barrel designed to accommodate a flash suppressor, and a grenade launcher. So let's say you have a military-style pistol grip as
you were mentioning,
well as here, and a bayonet mount that doesn't actually have a bayonet, so only the possibility of plugging in a bayonet. That's already enough for you to require a separate license and 24 additional hours of training.
Lovely.
Yeah, but there's a part C to the definition. A semi-automatic pistol that has an ability to accept a detachable magazine and has at least 2 of, an ammunition magazine that attaches to the pistol outside of the pistol grip, a threaded barrel capable of accepting a barrel extender, flash suppressor, forward hand grip, or a silencer. Honestly, a forward hand grip, really? 3, a shroud that is attached to or partially or completely encircles the barrel and that permits the shooter to hold the firearm with the non-trigger hand without being burned. A manufactured weight. So this is just an additional part where you can grip the gun. A manufactured weight of 50 ounces or more when the pistol is unloaded. So it's just heavy. And a semi-automatic version of an automatic firearm. So even if it's not automatic, if it's just semi-automatic, but it's a version of an automatic firearm that's semi-automatic, that counts additionally.
Yes.
And there's a section D, a part D as well. A semi-automatic shotgun that has at least two of a folding or telescoping stock, a pistol grip that protrudes conspicuously beneath the action of a weapon, a fixed magazine capacity in excess of 5 rounds, and an ability to accept a detachable magazine. And here's a clerical amendment. The table of sections for such chapter is amended by adding at the end the following 932 licensing of firearm and ammunition possession registration of firearms. So this is, so they name dropped a few guns, and then they put in a list of additional types of guns. But honestly, some of these attachments wouldn't be very useful. For example, a grenade launcher on a semi-automatic rifle. Grenades are already hard to come by because of regulations regarding explosives. So having a grenade launcher on a gun, on a semi-automatic rifle, isn't too useful anyway. So from a perspective of things you want to ban, that's that doesn't really change too much there.
Yeah, the funny one to me is the pistol grip. Like, I don't really sure what that does for anybody. Like, I don't know why you would want to ban that.
Yeah, it's beneath the action of a weapon. So in the case of a rifle, it would mean that obviously you've got the stock and you've got the action, and the pistol grip is beneath the action. Because on a lot of rifles, you have a trigger that isn't really in a pistol grip, where you sort of grip, I'm probably not using the correct terminology, but you sort of grip the stock of the rifle in some way. But with a pistol grip, it's got a grip beneath it. So think about it as I don't know off the top of my head exactly, but a lot of guns can be modded to have different types of grips and triggers.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it allows you to have a stability when firing that's different from normal. For example, normally it's hard to fire a rifle without a pistol grip from anywhere but the shoulder. You can, but it's more difficult to hold it because you have to put your arms in an awkward position. But with a pistol grip, you can fire from the hip, like a Tommy gun, for example.
Yeah, yeah.
But again, it's a lot of hype around these guns because a lot of the elements of these guns that would make them functional as military weapons are already banned by the government in some way. So, in my view, they're simply cracking down based on hype.
Right, yeah. They're definitely being a little bit more, I don't want to necessarily say radical, because I don't think that I guess it kind of works for the bill in a little bit, but they're definitely being a lot more strict than trying to just pass a bill that could be passed by both sides, if I'm making sense. I don't think that this is going to be agreed by many or any Republicans for that matter.
Yeah, and additionally, the Attorney General gets even more power. Within 1 year after the date of the enactment of this act, the Attorney General shall prescribe final regulations to implement the amendments made by this subsection. And of course, the Attorney General has full control of exactly what kind of regulations these are, as long as they implement the amendments made by the subsection.
Yeah, that's all power.
Yeah, so the next part talks about prohibitions and penalties. So Prohibition Section 922 of such title is amended by adding at the end the following: it shall be unlawful for a person to possess a firearm or ammunition unless the person is carrying a valid license. In the case of a firearm owned by the person, the firearm is registered to the person under Section 932B, or in the case of a firearm owned by another person, the firearm is so registered to such other person, and such other person has notified the Attorney General that the firearm has been loaned to the person, and the possession is during the loan period specified in the notice. So you have to essentially file in all the paperwork before you are allowed to loan someone a gun for any reason, because if that person has possession of the gun for, let's say, a minute, that person could, in theory, be arrested for illegal possession of a firearm.
Right. So that once again goes back to the whole timing effort of that. Like I think for hunting purposes, and I think you even mentioned that example earlier in the show. But like, yeah, if somebody wanted to borrow your gun for hunting, it's a lot harder to do so.
Yeah. It shall be unlawful for a person to transfer a firearm or ammunition to a person who is not licensed under Section 932. It shall be unlawful for a person to sell or give a firearm or ammunition to another person unless the person has notified the Attorney General of the sale or gift. It shall be unlawful for a person to loan a firearm or ammunition to another person unless the person has notified the Attorney General of the loan, including the identity of such person and the period for which the loan is made. It shall be unlawful for a person holding a valid license issued under Section 932 to transfer a firearm to an individual who has not attained 18 years of age, which means that if you are under 18, you can't go hunting with a gun anyway. A person who possesses a firearm or to whom a license is issued under Section 932 shall have in effect an insurance policy issued under Section 932. So you, of course, require the insurance as well. Now, of course, there are penalties for breaking these laws.
Of course.
Yeah, whoever knowingly violates Section 922 AA, which is already in the U.S. Code, but this is a different penalty, shall be fined not less than $75,000 and not more than $150,000, imprisoned not less than 15 years, and not more than 25 years or both. Now, for reference here, under the U.S. Code, if someone is engaging in insurrection or rebellion against the U.S., the maximum imprisonment period is 10 years. So you can take up arms and rebel against the United States, and you get imprisoned for 10 years. But you get fiddly around with who gets guns, and you get imprisoned for 15 years, at least. In that's Section 922 AA.
It seems a little bit off, just a little bit.
Yeah. And it does further amendments to Section 922. I'm not going to get into Section 922 because it's long and there's a lot of stuff dealing with it. Conforming amendments, elimination of prohibition on establishment of central firearm registration system. Section 926 of such title is amended by striking the second sentence. Applicability to governmental and military firearms and ammunition. Section 925 of such title is amended in each paragraph 1 and 2 by inserting an excerpt from Section 932 after the second comma. Effective date, the amendment made by this subsection shall take effect on the same date final regulations are prescribed under subsection A. Now, here's the other big section here, the prohibition on possession of certain ammunition. So there are certain types of ammunition that, according to this bill, you would not be allowed to own. So these ammunitions are ammunition that is .50 caliber or greater. So this is 50 cal, some pretty large guns, heavy machine guns. Some of them use this caliber. But let's be honest, the average street criminal is not likely to be affected by this, because these are the kinds of guns some people like to call wrist breakers. If you're not good at holding guns like this, they fly out of your hand when you shoot them. So it's not the kind that the average career criminal would carry around.
More hobbyist for those type of guns, I would say.
Well, there are people that do carry it and people that are ready to use them. But I'm on the principle of the question as to whether this is going to reduce gun crime or reduce the severity of gun crime. I'm questioning that. That's what I'm doing here.
Right. Because
this is probably not the most common caliber that is used out there, or at least not the preferred caliber that career criminals would use.
For sure, yeah.
And it shall be unlawful for any person to possess a large capacity ammunition feeding device. Now, what is a large capacity ammunition feeding device? And of course, exceptions are made for the U.S. government and the police on these. The police can still use these guns, but private citizens can't. A large capacity ammunition feeding device is defined under Section 921 of such title as amended and is mended here. The term large capacity ammunition feeding device means a magazine, belt, drum, feed strip, or similar device that has a capacity of or that can be readily restored or converted to accept more than 10 rounds of ammunition, but does not include an attached tubular device designed to accept and capable of operating only with .22 caliber rimfire ammunition. So if you've got more than 10 rounds, it's now forbidden for private citizens to use.
Right, so they're trying to get rid of people who have more bullets for that really you need.
And of course, they're putting in. So, for example, they're putting in restrictions on how on the law here. So if you, for example, whoever knowingly violates Section 922 DD, which is the emendation that is being made here, Section 922 of Title 18 is being amended by Section 3 of this bill. The fine shall be, the person that violates it shall be fined not less than 50,000 and not more than 100,000, imprisoned not less than 10 years, and not more than 20 years. So for using a 50 cal gun, actually no, not for using it, for being in possession of a 50 cal gun, you get imprisoned not less than 10 years for simply being in possession of it.
Yeah, that's not even using, just be. Yeah, that is crazy. I don't. There's no other word for that.
Indeed. So you said that you have a somewhat different perspective regarding how regarding guns than some other people in Texas.
Yes. Now, I don't agree with this particular bill really that much, but the reason I kind of stated that is I've used guns before, and I don't own a gun now. Obviously, I don't even think I might be old enough for Texas, but I don't know. I wouldn't really want one until I even have a home, but that's a whole other thing. But my dad has had guns before, and we've had guns in the house. His brother is more, I guess you could call it country than he is, and they've gone hunting and used guns a lot more than I have. So I didn't really grow up too much around guns. So the reason I kind of stated that at the beginning was that in general, I would say that I'm more for like making background checks maybe a little bit tougher than they are now than the average Texan, but I'm not really for the legislation that was in the bill, but that's more kind of why I stated it at the beginning, because I don't think I'm not like the average, or not the type of Texan that's like all, has guns everywhere or that type of thing.
Yeah. Okay. But anyway, I do think that while my position on in general on gun control is that the government should be in control of WMDs, okay? Because any weapon that can destroy a whole town at once is something that I don't think should be available for private use. Okay, no recreational McNukes. That's my opinion on that. But I think that other weapons should be, whether or not they are allowable, should be decided by the community in which it exists, so that they can regulate based on the needs of a community.
Right. Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't really see the reason for having like the super high caliber weapons or like the extra magazine. Like, I don't really see the real purpose for that. I mean, I understand if you want to do it at like the shooting range and have like your hobby for it, but the idea that you could just kind of buy that type of gun is a little bit sketchy. I'm still developing my thoughts when it comes to kind of gun control a little bit more, because I'm still kind of developing my thoughts around it, but I don't think you necessarily need that, is kind of how I view it.
Yeah. I understand the idea of people not needing it, but in some situations, I think that there might be a situation where it would be useful to have these weapons. For example, the general population of the U.S. can be considered part of the unorganized militia. So in the case that perhaps there's a shortage in weapons, perhaps there is an invasion, a foreign invasion on American soil, or perhaps there's a shortage in soldiers, it would be useful to have an armed populace that is capable of using weapons of war.
Right. The only counter to that one that I have is that if the people are the ones that no longer can own those type of weapons, I still think that they would be somewhere else. Maybe, but I don't know if they would. The opposite to my own devil's advocate for what I just said is that maybe they wouldn't be made if people can't purchase them. No company's just going to make something that nobody can purchase. So there could be that as well.
Yeah, that's true. The companies would be less likely to produce them, but of course, internationally speaking, other countries might not have the same restrictions as exist here. So they'll still be produced somewhere. Some countries might decide to simply relocate to other areas where they can continue meeting demand. Of course, because demand is reduced due to legal restrictions, they will still probably reduce production of the restricted weapons. However, there will still be people perhaps producing it internationally or producing it illegally.
Right. I mean, you see that with just every kind of business when it comes to regulations. Like, Nike produces their shoes in Taiwan, I think it is now. But you always have these stories about companies, like clothing companies, especially, that use lower labor to produce their goods rather than restrictions here in the United States. So I mean, it could be the same thing just with guns.
Yeah, what's interesting here is that there is a good potential of this bill passing. And that is, of course, because the Democrats have a majority in the House of Representatives, and they have the tie-breaking vote in Congress, the Senate. And
Yeah.
because of that, there's a good possibility of it passing. However, there's always the possibility that somebody will, among the Democrats, might change their position in relation to the party and might oppose it for various reasons, perhaps moderates or some other group. Additionally, there's the possibility that some Republicans might support the bill. So it's very interesting to see where this is going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is one I'm definitely going to be paying attention to because it's definitely got its radical moments, I guess you could call it. But there is, like you just mentioned, there is definitely a possibility of it passing in the House for sure. And then Congress is a little bit up for debate just because it is a tie. But I mean, it's very possible someone like Susan Collins might vote for it, who is a Republican, or somebody similar to her. So I mean, it could be either side of the aisle that may switch votes, or maybe they're just vote by party, and then it's up to Kamala. But either way, there is a decent possibility that this would be passed.
Of course, there's also the possibility that it gets trapped in committee and never gets to be voted on.
Yeah, the legal process.
Yeah. But even if it is trapped in committee, there are ways to force a vote on a bill by skipping the committee. So if there's enough support behind it, it will make it to the floor to be voted on.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that this bill is going to make it to the floor at some point. It's just a matter of how soon or how not soon it's going to be. Like I don't know how rushed it's going to be brought to the floor.
Yeah, and I'm sure that Joe Biden, because this bill gives his administration a tremendous amount of power, will vote in. Will sign it, and therefore it would become law. Now, of course, the problem is that for the bill anyway, is that there's a lot of people that are opposed to it, and perhaps opposed to it to the degree that they might be unwilling to comply. Now, there's a couple of possibilities. It could be that whole states refuse to comply in a similar way that states refuse to comply with federal marijuana regulation, in which case marijuana still is a federal crime to possess, as far as I'm aware. But a lot of states choose to break the law and ignore it. And that could happen, in which case it would be relatively peaceful, although a tense situation. Or there might be a situation in which case the general population becomes so agitated, especially in blue states, that they may be willing to resort to disobedience or perhaps even outright violence in response to this emergent situation.
Right. I mean, you're talking about gun owners are very passionate in general. You don't come across many gun owners that are just have a gun for just in case type of scenarios. Those obviously exist, but I would say in general, the average gun owner is very passionate about guns and Second Amendment rights, freedom of speech, those type of concepts. So, I mean, if if the government is going to be strict with this, I could definitely see a potential for violence to ensue. Not that I'm promoting that by any means, but I could
Yes.
definitely see the potential.
Yeah. Let's be very clear. We are not promoting violence on this show. However, we are saying that there is a possibility that some people who do promote violence or who do believe that violence is justified in such a situation will take that as an opportunity to engage in violence.
Right. Hopefully, it'll be the first.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we've discussed the issue. I know that there's a couple of other gun legislations out in the States. I'm not entirely familiar with those. Do you have any comments on those?
I haven't spent too much time looking at those. I was going to because I plan to do a kind of a gun stream next week, just talking about this bill a little bit with and other bills in the state. So, but I haven't looked at it too much yet, so I couldn't tell you any like details on particular gun legislations or what states are doing yet.
Yep. So anyway, in that case, I think we should wrap up. I'd like to thank our beautiful audience for watching. I hope this has been informative and insightful.
Yes, thank you very much for stopping by, and we appreciate you all.
Yep. Goodbye.